as you learn more and more about programming, you'll kind of start to get the idea that programming is really just like extra powerful math. Everything you're doing is similar to math, except now you can interact with text and you can input from the user, and you can do so much more. You can work with images. But one of the foundational things in programming is very similar to a foundational part of math, and that's operators. So in math, we have these operators, things like the plus for addition, the minus for subtraction. And the operators, their job is to take data and either change the data or tell us something about that data. So in this lesson, we're going to learn about the different operators that we can use in programming to change or learn things about data, both numbers like in math and things beyond numbers. So let's start out here with the arithmetic operators. And arithmetic operators, as you might be able to tell from the name, are operators that are just taken directly from math. They do mathematical operations. So here's a little table of the basic arithmetic operators. The first one we've already used is the plus sign for addition, the minus sign for subtraction, the asterisk for multiplication, and the forward slash for division. And this last one you might not recognize. It's called the modulus symbol, and basically in programming it returns the remainder after dividing a number by another number. So for instance, right here you can see it being used. We divide 23 by 7 and it will return 2 because after dividing 23 by 7 equally there's 2 left over. So here's some examples of using arithmetic operations to do calculations. I'm just going to take this and copy it into Eclipse and then walk through what it's actually doing behind the scenes. So let's delete this old code. And let's run this program. And you can see it prints out 5, but let's break down what it's doing. Right here we have two variables. One of them is the integer variable a, one of them is the integer variable b, and a is 2 and b is 3. And then we're creating another variable c that is the product or the sum of these two variables a and b. And then we print out the variable c. So we can change this operator here and get different results based off what kind of calculation we're doing. Let's change it to the asterisk, and that should multiply the two, and we should end up getting 6 instead of 5 here. Let's try that. And just like we thought, we got a 6. Let's try the division symbol. And so the division symbol should divide a by b. We should get 2/3, or 0.6 repeating. And we don't, only because we're working with integers. And so it gets 0.6 repeating, but then it has to either round it up or down to the nearest whole number. So in this case, it rounds it down to 0. But if we change each of these to a double, then we'll be able to see decimal values, and we will get 0.6 repeating. So let's run that one more time, and we get 0.6 repeating. So those are the basic arithmetic operators. Oh, let's try one more thing. Let's try the modulus operator, since that's something a little unique to most people when they start learning programming. And let's do 100 divided by 9, and we'll get the remainder of this after we divide 100 into 9 groups. So I'll click play, and we see that it's 1. Because you can multiply 9 times 11 and you get 99 with the remainder of 1. Okay, so that's an overview of the arithmetic operators. Let's move on to the next class of operator, or the next group of operators, and those are the relational operators. So the purpose of a relational operator is to compare two things. They make comparisons. So here's a table of each of the relational operators. The first one is equals, and you'll see that this isn't a regular equal sign because, like we've learned in Java, if you use just a plain equal sign, that's trying to set a variable to a certain value. So the double equal sign is what we use to compare two values and see if they're equal. This one is kind of like the equal sign, but it tests whether or not two values are not equal. So if you use this between a 5 and a 6, it will say true because 5 is not equal to 6. Whereas if you use the equals operator, it will say false because, well, 5 is not equal to 6. Now, this is the greater than operator. It tests whether the first the thing on the left-hand side is greater than the number on the right-hand side. And this one, likewise, tests whether the number on the left-hand side is less than the number on the right-hand side. And these two operators are really similar to the last two, except they test whether they're greater than or equal to. So all of these are the relational operators that test relations between numbers or other types of data. And right here we can see a little example of this. This is a Boolean variable, so remember a variable that can be either true or false. And the variable's name is equal. And we're setting it to the value of this little test right here. This test is testing whether or not 7 is equal to 18. And obviously it's not, so the value of this variable should be false. And then it prints out the value of the variable. Let's put this in Eclipse and see if it does indeed run as we intended it to. I'll click play, and you can see there that it prints out false. Now, if we change one of these to be the same as the other, so that 7 is equal to 7, you'll see it does print out true. Let's experiment with a few other of these operators. I'm going to try using the less than operator and see if 7 is less than 7. And we find out that it's not. But if I add the equal sign right after that, that turns this into a less than or equals to operator. So in this case, it will print out true. So that's an overview of the relational operators. And I encourage you to copy this into your Eclipse and play around just like I was to kind of test how these work and see them working in real life in your Eclipse. So let's move on to the next group of operators, which is the logical operators. So these three operators can be used in logical statements. What do I mean by that? I mean statements that are testing, like we just saw, that are testing whether or not things are true. So for instance, let's put this code back. Right here, we're just testing one thing. We're testing whether 7 is equal to 7. But what if we care about two things at the same time? We want them both to be true. We want 7 to equal 7 and 8 to equal 8, for instance. Well, in that case, we can use this AND operator. So it's two ampersands right here, and I'm going to copy this in here and paste that right there. And then we can splice together a second condition to check if it's true. Now I'm going to make the second condition false. So we can see clearly that the first condition, 7 equals 7, is true. The second one is false, 3 does not equal 3. But we're testing whether they are both true, whether 7 equals 7 and 3 equals 7. So even though one of them is true, it's still going to output false. Let's click play, and you can see right there it outputs false. And if I change this second one to 3, now this first condition is true and the second condition is true, so it will output true. Let's look at the second logical operator, and this one is the OR. And if you think about how the AND operator worked, you'll be able to kind of work out how the OR operator works. The OR operator is two of these pipe characters right next to each other. So I'm going to replace this AND operator with the OR operator. The OR operator will return true if either of the statements is true. So I could change this back to another number, 12 for instance. And now this condition is false, but this condition is true. So this condition or this condition is true, and this variable will ultimately equal true. Now if I change this to equal some other number, let's say 0, now this condition is false, and this condition is false, so neither of them are true, and it will return false. And then this last operator, you might recognize from up here in our relational operators, we used the exclamation point to represent not equals. You can also just use the exclamation point alone to kind of reverse the logic of any of these. So an exclamation point, if this whole thing equates to false, like it does right now, will turn it into true. So it's kind of like saying if not this whole thing. So I put everything inside of parentheses, and I put the exclamation point right here at the beginning, and it reverses whatever the whole condition inside was. And we can see this a little simpler if I delete this, because we're using two different conditions inside, and I can just straight up type either false or true, and you'll see that it'll switch the false to a true when I print it out. And if I type in true here, this little not symbol will switch it to a false. So those are the three logical operators. Now, let's talk a little bit about combining operators. You can use multiple of these different kinds of operators together to create more complex statements and test more complex things. So here's an example. In this example, we want to test whether our monthly spendings and costs are over or under our maximum amount for that month. So we have three variables here. We have the cost of gasoline for that month, the cost for entertainment for that month, and the cost for food for that month. And we have another variable that's our maximum budget for that month, the maximum that we can spend. So let's copy this into Eclipse and then look at how this logic statement is working. So right here, you can see it's giving me an error. If you remember back on a previous lesson, it's because Java by default is considering each of these to be a double. So if we just type F after each of them, then it will recognize them as floats, like these float variables are. Now, right here we have each of these variables, and down here we have this logic statement. And let me expand this so you can see it a little bit better. Each of these we're adding together, so we're using the arithmetic operators to add the variable values together here. And then we're comparing whether this added together cost is less than or equal our maximum budget. So right here we have a relational operator combined with all these arithmetic operators. And then all of that is right here being stored in a Boolean variable. And then we print out that Boolean variable. Its name is over budget. We print it out. So if we get false, it will mean that we are not over the budget, that we stayed under the budget. If we get true, it means that we are over the budget. Or pardon me, I got that backwards. This variable should actually be called is under budget. So it's actually testing whether this is under the budget. If we get true, it means that we are under the budget, and we did get true, which means that we're living within our budget. Now we can try adding other operators in here. If we wanted to, we could switch this like we had it before. We could switch this to is over budget. And then one way that we could just switch, kind of reverse this whole statement, is if we use that not sign. So this would be testing whether it's not less than or equal to budget max. And if we run this, now it says false because it's not, this total added cost is not less than or equal to our budget max. So that's how you can use all of these operators in complex ways to create different scenarios or different conditions to check. And that's really at the root of all complex algorithms or software, is these complex sort of mathematical statements, but that can deal with additional kinds of data. So now let's try it ourselves. In this activity, we're asked to test whether these two temperatures are equal. And if they're not, then we have to print out what the difference between the two temperatures is. So let's go back here, and this one is kind of similar to our last program in which we printed out the two temperatures, but in addition to printing out both temperatures, we also have to compare them and show what the difference is. So to get the two temperatures, first we're going to have to import the JTC Lab class. And then down here, we'll create a JTC Lab object. And then we'll create two variables for the first temperature. And we will call lab.t1 to read the first temperature. And I forgot to tell it what kind of variable it is. And we'll do the same thing for the second temperature. And then we'll write two print statements, just like we did in our last lesson, to print both temperatures out. And so thus far we have a program that does exactly what our last program did. We can print out both temperatures. But now we want the program to test whether or not they're equal. So let's do that with a simple comparison test. Now remember, if we scroll back up here to our comparison operators, we can see that to test equality we use two equal signs in a row. So we want to print out false if they're not equal and true if they are equal. So first let's print out right here, like it says, are the temperatures equal? We'll copy this. And then we'll print out the Boolean value of whether or not they're equal. System.out.println, and then right in here we can just compare temp1 equals temp2. Let's try that. Let's run our project, and we see that it connects to the lab. It prints the two temperatures. It says, are they equal? And of course they're not. And so it prints out false. So now let's go back, and the last thing we have to do is calculate the difference. So first let's print out the difference is. And then we just have to print out the difference between the two numbers. So we can do that with the minus operator, temp1 minus temp2. And in the case that temp1 is less than temp2 and you get a negative result, that's okay. It still tells us the difference, whether it's negative or positive. So let's try running that one more time, and we'll see that it connects successfully. It prints the temperatures out. It says they're not equal, and then it calculates the difference, which in this case is 0.469999 repeating. And then, of course, the last thing we need to do is disconnect from our lab with lab.close. We'll run that one more time, and we see it all runs successfully. And after it all, it disconnects. So that's an example of how you can use these complex logic and arithmetic operators together to get more information out of your TC lab. And you can even operate on the information to find the things out, like the difference between the two temperatures. So I hope you've learned something in this lesson. Make sure to keep checking back as we go throughout the course so that you don't forget any of these fundamentals, and I'll see you in the next lesson.